Brett Lonsdale, and welcome to our fifth and final webinar this week on business connectivity services, mainly around our BCS Meta Man tool and also the data viewer add-in for Office 365 as well. So my name is Brett Lonsdale. I'm from a company called Lightning Tools, and if you've been on a webinar this probably know all about this slide, but basically this is just a bit of a review of who Lightning Tools is for those of you that have not heard of us. So we're a company that have been going for around about 9 years now, and we've been building all sorts of different web parts and tools for Microsoft SharePoint, both on premises and also within Office 365 as well. So we have a couple of offices based in the US and also the UK, with around 7,000 customers worldwide, and our tools mainly are around permissions management, business connectivity services, content aggregation, so roll-ups, and we've also got a discussion forum and some data visualization tools as well, such as charting, data viewer, which you'll be able to have a look at today, as well as our new product which we announced yesterday, which is our migration tool, allowing you to migrate from SharePoint on-premises to Office 365. So if you want to know more about these tools, you can find out some information on our website. So you can just go to lightningtools.com and download a trial of the products from there. If you want to see any sort of announcements that are coming up about future webinars and things like that, then you can also follow us on Twitter using the @lightningtools Twitter account. Okay, so what we're here for today is to basically get an understanding of the Business Connectivity Services tool, BCS Meta Man, and so that we are all on the same page, we're just going to have a very brief sort of introduction to Business Connectivity Services and what that is, how it works within Office 365, so mainly looking at Business Connectivity Services out of the box, before we move on to the BCS Meta Man tool. And that's where we'll be able to see how to connect to some external data and basically make that data available throughout our Office 365 environments. And towards the end of the session, we'll also take a look at the data viewer add-in, so you can have a look at how you can style some of that data as well. So, what is Business Connectivity Services? Well, bit of a history lesson. If we date back to SharePoint 2007, we had a product called MOS, the Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, and there was an enterprise version of MOS that basically provided us with something called the Business Data Catalog. And Business Data Catalog gave us the ability to connect to external data sources, such as Microsoft SQL or Oracle and so on, and basically link to that data and make it available to view within SharePoint. So you had some view-only web parts. It was read-only back then, and you also had to interact with some of that data using SharePoint lists and libraries with an external data column. You could search that line of business data as well as manipulate it via the API, the SharePoint 2007 object model. So spinning forward a little bit to SharePoint 2010, Business Connectivity Services was the new name given for the Business Data Catalog, and it allowed us to do several things. There was something called the external list introduced. So with the external list, that meant that BCS wasn't just read-only. It allowed us to create items. We could edit items and delete items as well. And the idea being that end users wouldn't be able to really understand the difference between an internal list, being something like contacts or tasks or issues, to the external data. So maybe you have some external data like customers or contacts that are coming from an SAP, Oracle, or SQL database of some sorts. So, so users would be none the wiser. They could go into the external list, they could access all of this data, and all they care about is the fact that they were able to access it. Now this external list wasn't just available in the enterprise version of SharePoint 2010, it was available from SharePoint Foundations and up. And that became the same pattern for going through to SharePoint 2013 as well. BCS is also available for SharePoint 2016 and is also here in Office 365 as well. So you don't get with Office 365 is the ability to use search against that external data source. You can't create a content source against external data. Although if you're looking at implementing a hybrid environment, of course, having hybrid search would mean that you were able to make your on-premises data, so data that might be, again, on a physical server, maybe a SQL server or an Oracle server database within inside your organization. You could make that data available utilizing the search of Office 365 using a hybrid connection. So this is some of the stuff that we'll talk about today. What we're going to look at using Office 365 is two possible scenarios. That is connecting to external data via OData, or also connecting to external data via SQL Azure. Now, of course, you might have some on-premises data and wonder how are we going to connect to that. Well, don't forget that we can make this data available via OData. You can do that very, very easily, in fact, without even writing a line of code using Visual Studio. So Visual Studio, you can surface some on-premise data as an OData service. You can also connect to it via REST as well. And of course, you might want to look at synchronizing data with the SQL Azure database as well. So, so even if you have on-premises data, you can make the data available in the cloud, and we can then use business connectivity services in order to connect to it. Now, once we've connected to that data, there's several things here. We've got some web parts that allow us to display the data that we'll be having a look at. And it's not just a single web part mapping to a single table. We can show related data. So if we have one-to-many joins and so on within our external data sources, we can replicate that inside a dashboard in Office 365. So you can show things like the customers and the orders, and select the customer and show the related orders, and likewise with order details and so on. We will also have the external list available, so we can have a look at that and how we can manipulate the data via an external list. And there's also some Office interaction as well. So if you were using Microsoft Word or Excel or Microsoft Outlook, you can interact with the external data via those clients. So in other words, we could take things like contacts into our Outlook client. We can show an entire table of information in Excel and link to it. And we can use things like quick parts in Word in order to look up data from within inside a Word document. So similar to that, what we would have with like a mail merge or something, we're going to provide a lookup to the external data and have it automatically fill out other fields. And there's also some interaction with lists and libraries, so we can look up data as metadata within them and store data alongside our documents. Okay, so the external list, we'll just have a quick look at the slide, and then we're going to jump into Meta Man, build an external content type, make this data available, and then we'll start to build some of this stuff as well. So we'll create an external list, we'll add some web parts and so on. So just so we're all sort of on the same page as to what these things are. The external list, as I mentioned, it just appears to be any ordinary SharePoint list to the end user. There are a few differences that you'll notice, but overall it works just like any other SharePoint list. So as long as you create the methods, that's the main point here. If we create the methods when we're generating the external content type, we will have the ability to do things like view the data, edit the data, delete it, and so on. So there is a method that we'll be building using BCS Meta Man, which is effectively known as a read list method to the end user, or it's known as the finder method to a developer. And that finder method is basically going to return all of the columns and all of the rows of data from a table of some sort, whether that's a table or the results of a stored procedure or a view. It's basically a table of information, and we're going to make that available using the finder method. And each of these finder methods can have filters applied to them, so that allows the end user to be able to filter the content, and you can also create multiple finder methods as well. So you'll notice here inside my external list I've got something called get all customers. That is one finder method, and next to it I have German customers, which is another finder method. So we can create as many of these as we like, and then when the user creates an external list, it will automatically build those views for them and apply the relevant filter. So when you create a new item, if you were to click new item, this is the kind of form that you get. So you can apply the information and submit that to the external data source. You can customize those forms in InfoPath as well. So if you wanted to add any form of logic or validation or anything like that to them, that's also possible. You first of all have to go to SharePoint Designer. So open up your site in SharePoint Designer and then click the InfoPath button to customize those forms, and you'll be able to do it. The main other differences are, remember, the data doesn't actually reside in the list. The data resides in the external database, and that's a good thing. The last thing we want to do is to import hundreds of thousands of rows into SharePoint. Why would we do that? We're going to end up with record locking issues, we're going to end up with performance issues, and so on. So the idea here is that we link to the external data. We're not duplicating anything, we're not taking up additional storage, and as long as we get things like pagination right and so on, we can view that data without any performance troubles. But for that reason, there are some things that you can't do. So things like being able to edit multiple rows very, very quickly using a datasheet view or something like that, that's not possible. There's no item level permissions that you would normally get in SharePoint lists either, and you'll also notice that some of the ribbon options are grayed out. They're not available. Things like creating a column, you can't do that. You can only work with the underlying data source columns and not adding SharePoint columns to this list. The external data column is also a nice feature. So in any SharePoint list or library, you can create what's known as the external data column. So when you go to create a normal column inside a SharePoint list, you'll notice one of these options says external data, and you can point that to an external content type. The external content type being what we're going to create using our BCS Meta Man product in just a moment. So the external content type, we basically select it. So we might have one called customers, we might have one called orders, and so on. We just choose that, and then we select which column we want to store the value of against our documents. And we can also have other columns on show as well within inside the views. So this makes it great for uploading documents or creating documents in a document library, and we want to perhaps link to it the customers that we have inside our organization or the employees or something like that. So maybe we're creating a sales proposal document, and in order to find that in the future, we want to be able to search on the company name that the proposal was for. So rather than typing in or having our sales staff typing in the name of these customers, and therefore making typos or not being consistent with what they call the customer and so on, we can have them look up the customer name from the external data source, and that will store a copy of that data against the document permanently. So you can see here in the view also we're displaying that data as well. So we've got not just the customer name, but we've also got the address, the country, and the phone number, and that sort of thing as well. So that's a great feature of Business Connectivity Services. That provides some of the Office integration as well. So when you create a Word document within inside that document library, you can insert these things called quick parts within inside a Word document, and that would allow anybody creating the contents within the Word document. So maybe again they're creating a sales proposal, they can actually look up products and they can look up customers inside the document itself, and when they save it, that information becomes the metadata that is written back to the document library and therefore displayed within the view as well. So some great features there. So how do we make all of this available? Well, there's actually several tools that you can use in order to first of all build the connection. And we're going to build the connection using our BCS Meta Man tool in just a moment. But the other tools existing include SharePoint Designer and, of course, Visual Studio as well. So, so let's just run over those briefly. If we were using SharePoint Designer, then you can create an external content type. It will point to a Microsoft SQL database, a WCF service, or a .NET assembly. Now when you're working with Office 365, the .NET assembly is out. That's really used for custom external content types that you want to build. So that has to be registered as a DLL on the SharePoint server and so on, so therefore we can't use that with inside Office 365. But you could use the SQL server if the SQL Server database was in SQL Azure, and you can also use a WCF REST service as well, so you can connect to that. Bear in mind that when you're connecting to these WCF services, that they have to be written with business connectivity services in mind. So it's not just any WCF service that happens to return data. We need to create the WCF service so that it's got the finder method and the creator method and the updater method and deleter method and so on, so that we can interact with that data through the likes of the external list. So SharePoint Designer is available, and you don't have to write any code using SharePoint Designer to create the external content type, but really you're restricted to SQL or WCF. Visual Studio, you can use that to generate code. So you could, again, create the WCF services using Visual Studio, or you could create an external content type that exposes data via OData as well. So a couple of options there. Using Visual Studio, if you were to create an external content type with OData, you'll find there's actually a project wizard that allows you to do that. So you create a new SharePoint add-in within Visual Studio, and you add to it an OData connection, and that will actually, without you writing code, build a SharePoint add-in for Office 365. However, it only makes available the external list. So that means you can't use any of these other things that we've mentioned, such as the Office integration or the ability to look up the data via the lists and libraries and so on. In order to do that, you have to actually create the model file and import the model file, which is what BCS Meta Man will allow us to do. So BCS Meta Man, it's a Windows application. We can start up the Windows application and connect to multiple different data sources, including the SQL Azure and the OData, and that's what we're going to take a look at just now. You don't have to just use it with Office 365. If you have a SharePoint on-premises environment, you can use it with that as well. So what do we have here? So here's BCS Meta Man. You'll notice there's several different data sources that we can connect to. So we have the ability to connect to Microsoft Dynamics Online, OData, ODBC, and there's under ODBC there's multiple different data sources there that we've already created connections for, although you can create any connection string for any ODBC data source as long as you have the driver installed. We also have connections to Oracle, Salesforce.com, SQL Server, and WCF services as well. So what we're going to focus on here is OData. So I'm basically connecting to a OData service that is exposing the data via Northwind. And we could also have a look at a SQL Server connection as well, if you like. So once we've provided the URL to the service, we can hit this blue arrow on the page. That will create the connection, and under tables we've got some lazy loading, so we basically click onto the tables button, and that then exposes all the tables that are available from that OData source. So like I say, if you have some on-premises data, you could create an OData service that also exposes your data via an OData service. So so in here we have several different tables of information, and what I'm going to do is just drag across this one here. This is the customer table, so we'll just simply drop that onto the design surface. Now what it will allow me to do here is go through and set several properties. We've got the name of the external content type first of all, which happens to default to the name of the table. We've also got the identifier, so the identifier being the primary key in this case, and that's very important for business connectivity services. Your identifier that you set has to be unique. We have to have a unique way of being able to open up an item, and that identifier value is passed as query strings quite often when you're going to open up an item. So if it's a duplicate value, it won't work. In fact, you won't even be able to import the model file if that was the case. So, so it has to be a unique column. Over on the right, we then have lots of different methods that we can create. Now, the two required methods are highlighted. We've got the finder method, and we've also got the specific finder method. So the finder method is essentially returning all of the rows of data and all of the columns. The specific finder method is returning a single row of data, based upon the identifier. So this is where we can pass to it a customer ID, and it will give us one row back. The ID enumerator is really redundant when we're working with Office 365. So this ID enumerator is basically allowing the search indexing to work. So in SharePoint on-premises, you can index the external data and therefore search it via the search site. But we also have the creator, the updater, and the deleter method as well. And once again, if you are working in a hybrid environment, you could do this on the on-prem server, create an ID enumerator, make that data available in the search within your on-prem, and then use a hybrid search so that you can also search that within Office 365 as well. Okay, so once we've generated those methods, we can hit create. So all we did to create those methods was click them. That was it. And then from here, we can preview our data as well. So let's just make the window a little larger. And we'll click the icon in the top right-hand corner, and that returns the first 10 rows of that data source, so we can see we're connecting to the right data when we go ahead and deploy this. So we're happy with that. We can go through and set some other properties. So like I mentioned, or one of the properties I haven't mentioned yet is you can set the title column. So this allows us to, when we add this data as a web part within inside SharePoint, the title column is the column that will have the custom actions, so things like view profile and things like that on it. We can also control how this data gets imported into Outlook. So that's the Office item type property. So do we want to bring it across as appointments or contacts or posts or tasks? So obviously this is contact information, so we could map that to contact and basically map each of the columns through to the Office columns. The Methods tab here shows me the methods that I created. So there's the Finder, Specific Finder, Creator, Updater, and Deleter methods. We can create further methods, as I mentioned, which is sometimes a good idea. So what we're going to do here is we'll create that one called German customers. And the reason I'm choosing Germany is because I can never remember whether the Northwind data lists the country United States as United States or USA or what. So I'll just pick German customers because that one sticks in my mind as Germany. Okay, so we can make that the default as well, and notice that we also then set the type of operation this is. So this is going to be another Finder method that we're creating. So I've set that to Finder, and then we hit save, and we now have another Finder method. Now this will create a new view whenever anybody creates a new external list. So we can create as many of these as we like and automatically generate views. And that also allows me to rename the default one. So rather than get all customer, we could call that just all customers or something like that. But what we're going to concentrate on here is the Finder method for German customers. So I need to add the filter. So I'll add a filter here, which is going to be a wildcard filter, and we'll just name the filter country, map it to the country field, and set our default value, which is Germany. Okay, and hit save. That's our filter created. Now there's other types of filters that we can also create. So we can go through and create wildcard filters and comparison filters. Also we can go and create limit filters, so it limits the amount of data that's going to be returned, and so on. So once we're happy with that, we basically hit save and update, and that has created our method for us. The other thing we can do is create custom actions, and there's some predefined custom actions in here. I'm going to choose the Google search custom action, and this will allow users to do things with a single click. So if you're looking at a list of customers, one of the things you might want to do is email the customer, or you might want to Google search the customer, and so on. So rather than actually opening up a new window and typing in google.com and then typing in the name of the customer, you can just click it from the row and it will perform a Google search. So all we do here is we take the URL of the action. This could be any URL whatsoever that accepts parameters, and we can add a column. So I'm going to add the company name column that will be mapped through to the query parameter for that URL. So we're going to pass the company name through to the Google search parameter. And once we're happy with that, we just hit update, and that's been created for us. Now the next part is we're going to add another table. So I'm going to drag and drop the orders table across here. And again, we'll create some methods. Hit create. I won't worry about all the other settings. Let's just make sure we get some data back, which we do. And what we can then do is build a join between these two external content types. So that is basically allowing me, it's building what's known as an association, a relationship, so that when I add two web parts onto the page, I can join these two together, and that allows me to click onto a customer and see the orders related to that customer. It also works with the profile pages as well. So if I open up a customer row inside a profile page, it will show me the related orders to that customer as well. So a couple of things left to do. On the settings tab, this is where we can basically go through and name our model file. We give it a name, a namespace, lob system name, and a lob system instance name. We can also set where we want to deploy this to, and so we set the URL there of where it's going to be deployed to. And once we've done that, we can either hit deploy, which will deploy it straight away, or we can hit generate. And I want to hit generate just so I can see or show you what happens to the model file, and we can have a look at the model file as well. So on my desktop basically is going to be the model. So here it is, and you can see there's a whole bunch of XML that has been written. Hopefully you will see that in just a second. So here's a whole bunch of XML that has been written, which basically describes the data that we're connecting to over around about 300 lines of XML. So that's what we've been able to generate. So each of the finder, specific finder, creator, updater, deleter, and so on is all defined in here. So we're going to import that file. So first thing we'll do here is go into the Office 365 Admin Center, and once we're in the Admin Center, we can import the model. So we just simply click onto Import. You will notice BCS on the left-hand side. So we select BCS and we click Import. Okay, so just waiting for that to load. Okay, just whilst we are waiting, there are a number of other settings in here as well, like the metadata store permissions and the object permissions. So we'll talk about that briefly. So when you are creating the model file, you can basically say who's allowed to access this external data. So you can list the SharePoint users and whether they're allowed to execute the data, whether they're allowed to set permissions on the data themselves, and so on. So the last thing to do is basically to browse out to the model file, and once we've done that, we hit import, and that will import that XML, the external content type, into our SharePoint environments. Okay, so that would just take hopefully just a couple of seconds to load. Once that's loaded, the permissions are set, we can begin to use that data to create things like the external lists and add the web parts to the page and so on. Okay, so typically this knows that I'm in a webinar, so it's going to take longer than the few seconds that I suggested. So if we can just bear with that, hopefully we'll see that that's imported in just a second. Okay, so just whilst we're waiting for that, let's open up for any questions. If you do have any questions, you can raise your hand using the GoToWebinar software. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions right now. So it has imported. There's a couple of warnings there that I didn't create a limit filter. That's fine because I know what data is in there. There's no more than a couple of hundred rows in each table. If we were connecting to tables that had thousands of rows of data, then what we might decide to do is set a limit filter so that we don't go over say 5,000 rows per view or something like that. Okay, so that's been imported. We've clicked on OK, and now we can begin to use that data in Office 365. So we'll navigate back to Office 365 here, and we can go through and create our external list. So from the site actions, we choose Add an App, and in the list of available apps, we will find the external list. Hiding away in here somewhere. Okay, here it is. So we can select external list and provide it a name. So I'm just going to simply name this customers. And then I'm going to choose the newly created external content type. So when we use the content type picker, you'll notice under Office 365 week that we've got the customer and the order external content types available. So I'll choose the customer, click on OK, and we'll then choose create. Okay, and once we've done that, you'll see the customers external list is available right at the very top, newly created, so we can basically select that, and hopefully we'll be able to see some data. So so this will load, and there's our data on the page. We've got the two views, the Get All Customers as well as the German customers view, and we can also go through, perform a Google search if we like. That's the custom action that we created, and then we've also got the edit item, delete item, and view item, and so on. Okay, so that's the external list created. We could also go through and utilize some of this data in the lists or libraries, as I mentioned. So if we just navigate into a blank document library, on the library tab at the very top, we can create a new column. So we'll create a column here. Okay, and I'm simply going to name that column customer. We'll choose the external data type. And then we can also choose the external content type from the list. So again, I can go through, select the picker, and then choose the customer's external content type. Once we've done that, it's a simple case of mapping the columns. So, so in the drop down here, I'm going to specify that I want to use the company name column to store against my documents, but at the same time I'd like to display some other values, so I can display things like the address, city, and country within inside my view. So so once I'm okay with that, I just simply click onto OK, and if we were then to either create or upload a document, we can set some of that metadata. So so I'll just simply update a Word document here, or sorry, upload a Word document. So we have a brand new document within inside the document library, and we can go through and set some of the properties on it. So if we navigate to the properties, we have the ability to look up from our external data source. And once again, you could do the same thing from within Word as well, using the quick parts. So here we have a dialog. We can select the data that we want to show. Once we've chosen it, click on OK and save that value. It's written that metadata along with the document, and we can build views on it and navigate that content as well. Okay, so that's a great feature to use with Office 365 for storing values against documents from our live external data sources. The next thing we might want to do is start to add some web parts. So here we'll just quickly add a couple of web parts onto the page so we can see how that association works between the two. I'm just going to remove some of these existing web parts to create some space. And once we've done that, we can insert two of the business data connectivity web parts. So there's one called the business data list. So we're going to add that one first, and we're going to point that to the customers. So under business data, I will choose the business data list web part and add that. And over in this right-hand zone, I will go and insert the business data related list web part. Okay, so with those two web parts added onto the page, all we do is open up the tool pane for each one, point them to the relevant external content type. So we'll select customers for the business data list. Okay, and apply those changes. And then we're also going to go and open up the tool pane for the second web part, the related list web part, and do the same. So we're going to point that to the orders external content type. Okay, so we just wait for that to load. We can now choose the orders external content type. So it shows me what external content types have an association available. We can then apply that change and then simply build a connection between the two. So we're just using standard web part connections between the two web parts on the page once that association has been mapped. So we build the connection. And once we've done that, our job is done. We've got connected data. We can simply go through and select a customer from the list on the left-hand side, and that will show me all of the related data on the right-hand side inside the related list. So that way we get to see all of the orders associated with a particular customer. So we'll choose Alfie at the very top here. We'll click onto the icon to the left of his customer ID, and then over on the right-hand side, once it's fired that connection, we'll see the related orders. Okay, so Alfie is selected, and there's all the orders that Alfie has made. Okay, so that just shows some of the different capabilities of using business connectivity services, and also how we can use BCS Meta Man as well to generate the connections and make that data available. The last tool we're going to show you is another one of our tools. This is the Data Viewer that is available for Office 365 and also SharePoint on-premises as well. And basically it handles one thing. So within the out-of-the-box external list, or also the business data web parts, you can't really do any styling unless you do that styling using XSLT, which at the end of the day our users aren't going to have the ability to do that. So what we can do with the Data Viewer, it's an add-in that basically you can get from the store, and I have one already created here, so I'm just going to navigate through to the Lightning Data Viewer add-in on my page. Okay, and that will go ahead and display some of this data for me. So we can, first of all, create the connection using something like BCS Meta Man, or whether you want to use SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio. And once you've created the connection, you can style the data. So you might have things like conditional formatting going on. You can create multiple groups. You can create calculated columns, that sort of thing. So we'll have a look at the existing configuration. So under Actions, we go to Configure Data View, and this can do a couple of things. You can point it at any SharePoint list, or you can point it to a Business Connectivity Services external content type as well. So that's exactly what this one is doing. It's connecting to BCS. There's different display providers available, so you can use the grid view display provider that allows you to do all the styling within inside the browser itself, or you can also go through and choose some of the other views. There's a column view which shows the data in column format, so one row at a time in column format, and you've also got XSL and JSON as well, so you can really do all your own styling using that. As we go to the data source tab, you'll notice this is where it's basically going to go and map the external content type to all of the different methods. So we're connecting to customers. It's mapped the finder, creator, updater, and deleter methods here. And if we navigate onto columns, you can see the columns that I selected from the view. So this will load the available columns from the external content type, and simply you can go through and check which columns you want to include. You can filter those values. You can create a calculated column at the top here. So if you wanted to do a concatenation between two columns or something like that, you can. You can also build validation controls on the input form. So if we wanted to always make sure that people filled out the country, for example, we could add a validation rule in there to ensure that that's always filled in. And then on the display tab, we can go through and set things like the grouping, the conditional formatting, and all the data formatting, and so on as well. So notice here you've got the ability to format every single row, including data formats. You can build summary functions, and you'll see some of the conditional formatting that I've already set that is basically saying if the country is equal to Germany, then to highlight that within a certain color. And you can add as much of that conditional formatting as you like. So again, we could apply something to a row here that says if the country is equal to United States, and hopefully we'll get that right, then we'll change the background color to maybe green or something like that. So we can save that. You can go through and configure your headings, whether you want to allow the updating of the data, the grouping and sorting, so you can group by multiple columns in there as well. You've got pagination settings and things like that also. And once we're happy, we just hit save, and that builds our view for us so that the users get a better look and feel to the data that's being returned. Okay, so that's basically showing two of our tools, the BCS Meta Man tool and also the Data Viewer add-in for Office 365, and hopefully you've picked up a few things about business connectivity services along the way as well. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Either you can ask them now, in which case I can unmute you. I just need to be aware that you want to ask a question, so you can raise your hand using the GoToWebinar. Or if you want, you can email a question, so just email brett@lightningtools.com, or there's our website and Twitter handle there as well if you want to tweet a question to us. Okay, so I'll pause for a moment for any raised hands, but other than that, we'll finish the webinar and I'll answer any questions offline.